What's going on, everybody? Nick Whalen, John McKechnie here with you, talking best bets for NFL Week 17. John, productive week for both of us in Week 16. Went 2-1 with our best bets. I'm not counting the Eagles game as a loss. You and I both love Philly -3.5. I refuse to count it as a loss. Technically, it will go down as a loss. I will not be keeping that in my personal ledger. You know, every time something crazy like this happens, I always got to go right to StatHead. And I'm like, all right, how wild was it that Washington ended up winning that game outright? Since 2000, John, teams that score 30 points and force at least 5 turnovers are 185-4. 185-4. The Eagles were the first team since 2010 to lose a game with those parameters, but that wasn't enough. I had to dig deeper. So went to the start of the Super Bowl era. So we're talking the mid-60s. Teams that score 30 plus points, teams that force at least 5 turnovers, and teams that commit 1 or 0 turnovers. Those teams are 375-3, straight up. 375-3. And listen, I put this out on Twitter, so don't bark at me here, but the Eagles did technically commit 2 turnovers, but the second fumble that they were charged with, that was on the crazy lateral play at the end. Didn't end up mattering. Not a real turnover as far as I'm concerned. But these are the kind of odds that we're up against, John, for that result that we saw in that Philly-Washington game.
I felt so good about it. Like I left the TV watching realm. I like went out for a little jog and I was feeling good. And then I come back and they're like, here comes Jake Elliott to tie it or to take the lead. And I'm like, wait a second, what happened here? And yeah, things just got worse from there. I think really the only solace is that, like, not only did Philly blow the cover, but they lost. Like, I'm spiteful like that even during the holiday season. Like, if you're going to blow the cover, at least do me the favor of losing outright. So at least that happened. So everyone feels bad that was on Philly. But yeah, that was, 370 and what now? I mean, that's it's basically impossible what happened yesterday.
375-3, straight up. Normally when I look up stuff like this, it's usually not as crazy as I'm expecting. It's like I'm doing this for my own self-pity. I just need to know, like, I was not wrong. They were wrong. This is one where I was backed up on that. And God, I was at the book here in Milwaukee on Saturday. I had either Philly -3.5 or Philly money line tied into like everything. I mean, just a monster, catastrophic swing. And that Devontae Smith drop, my goodness, man. I mean, one of the worst drops you'll ever see given the circumstances. But anyway, I wanted to open the show just by airing some grievances on the Philadelphia Eagles. But as always, we have 3 games we want to discuss. We'll give our leans on those 3 games. We'll give you a couple previews of some of the bigger games on the slate. But real quickly, John, before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the MVP race. We got 2 weeks left. It certainly felt like going into Week 16, everybody's on Josh Allen. There's a straw poll going around where you see a little bit of Lamar, a little bit of Saquon, but certainly felt like it was going to be Josh Allen. I still think it will be Josh Allen, but we have seen a shift in the market. He was -900 going into Week 16. He's now -550 at DraftKings. So still a sizable favorite. You got Lamar at 4-1, Saquon at 12-1. Is this thing wrapped up? Is there anything your guy Lamar can do to pull home his 3rd MVP and what would be his 2nd straight?
Well, I think it's interesting. There's a bit of a historical parallel here where going into last year on Christmas Day, Lamar Jackson was also 2nd in the MVP race. He was going head-to-head with Brock Purdy, who was actually, if you can believe it, the leader in the clubhouse this time last year to win MVP. Lamar goes out, shows out. The Ravens blow the doors off of the 49ers, and all of a sudden the MVP race gets settled right then and there. There isn't that same head-to-head component this stage of the season. Obviously, the Ravens and the Bills already played, but the Ravens have a big game on a national stage on Wednesday going up against the Texans. If Lamar Jackson has a vintage performance and Josh Allen plays anything close to what he did on Sunday against the Patriots, and then if the Bills don't really need to do much in Week 18, all of a sudden this does get a little bit interesting here. So whereas I thought this was open and shut in favor of Allen this time a week ago, not so fast, my friend, as our guy Lee Corso would say.
All right, good. Sneaking in a little Lee Corso reference. We love that. I still think it's going to be Josh Allen. I think the fact that Lamar won it last year, right or wrong, and probably wrong, works against him. It's almost, we see this in every sport, right? Like you have to one up yourself to a strong degree, and you have to have no other, legitimate contender, no other guy like Josh Allen who kind of fits the, it's his turn type of narrative. But The problem with that, of course, is Lamar is playing significantly better than he was last year, right? I mean, the numbers between Lamar and Allen are very comparable in a lot of ways. Obviously, Buffalo has the better record notch right now. I will say the Bills ended up winning that game outright against New England. I think that may have really saved Josh Allen. If they lose that game straight up, I think we see a bigger hit in the odds.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And depending on what happens with the Chiefs the rest of the way, if the Bills do end up catching them for the 1 seed, then yeah, I mean, and I do think that Allen is absolutely deserving. He's had a monster season. I think you watch the film, like he probably is the best player in football this year. But to your point, last year's MVP race was just kind of weak sauce. Like Lamar Jackson just kind of won it by default more so. Like I thought that was leaps and bounds worse than his 2019 one, but this year better somehow than his 2019 one. So once the dust settles here, and there's gonna be some time for the voters to really think it over, the numbers are really going to paint a favorable picture for a strong case for Jackson. I still think it is going to be Allen, but it's going to be closer than we would have thought.
I do love that the books still tempt you by just putting up a full board here. It's like if you want to bet Geno Smith 200-1 right now, you could do it. If you want to bet Russell Wilson at 300-1, be my guest. We will book that for you. But yeah, it feels like it's a two-man race to me. Saquon, this might be as close as we see a running back get in the modern NFL. I still think Saquon's going to finish north of 2,000 yards, but I don't think he ever really had a legitimate chance. I think he would have had to put up like 2,400 plus yards for that to ever become a possibility, especially when you have two quarterbacks in Allen and Lamar who are putting up the numbers that they are. Anyway, let's get to the board here, John. 3 games each. Where do you want to start?
We'll start with the first game on Christmas Day. We'll go Pittsburgh versus Kansas City. This one in Pittsburgh.
All right.
Pittsburgh is 5-1 against the spread at home. And mind you, the Steelers 2.5-point underdogs in this one. I used our little historical odds tool here at RotoWire. Really good tool. A little bit difficult for a dumb guy like me to use, but eventually you figure it out.
I was going to say great tool once you know how to use it, but the setup is interesting.
Yeah, you got to be some level of competency for it. So it's taken me some time, as you can imagine. But I believe, if I'm reading it right, the Steelers are 9-3-1 against the spread as home dogs since 2021. Obviously, they've struggled a little bit without George Pickens of late, and Kansas City has kind of maybe washed away some of the bad taste in a lot of people's mouths with how they played Saturday against Houston. But I just like Pittsburgh as a home dog here. I think if they can get a little bit healthier here, I know it's going to, it's a tight squeeze here time frame wise. I think they can. And I think that they're a tough matchup for this Kansas City team. They're going to need to hit a couple of splash plays here. And that's difficult, much easier said than done against this Kansas City defense. But I think if Pickens is back, there's a chance here. So give me the Steelers at home as home underdogs against the Chiefs plus 2.5.
I like it. We got good news so far on George Pickens. Just a walkthrough on Monday for Pittsburgh, but estimated at a full participant. So I think especially when you compare it to where we were this time last week, I think the plan has been for Pickens to be back for this one. And it does seem reductive almost to say, like, without George Pickens, they can't generate big plays. With him, they can. That's literally how it's gone this year since Russell Wilson took over. And I would not feel good about this if Pickens doesn't play. But if he's out there, I think you're on the right side. And I will say there are some threes out there now as well. It was 2.5 across the board earlier in the day, but there are some threes now if you do want to grab Pittsburgh plus 3. John, I am going to an NFC North battle next week, and I'm assuming that nothing catastrophic happens in this Monday night game to knock me off of this, but I like the Green Bay Packers to cover 1.5 on the road at Minnesota. The Packers are in need of a signature win. That's the first thing I'll say. Their best win right now is Houston, Miami, maybe San Francisco with a backup quarterback. I mean, this is not a team that has that true resume confidence building win as they approach the postseason. And I think this is a team that recognizes that they need that. I think they can get there. Obviously, Minnesota continues to play well. I saw a stat yesterday that Sam Darnold now has 12 games this season with a QB rating north of 100, which ties him with Lamar Jackson for the most in the NFL. I think this is real. I don't think he's turning back into a pumpkin with 2 weeks left in the regular season. But at the same time, I still think Jordan Love is a better quarterback. I think the numbers the numbers I should say would indicate that Green Bay is playing even better than perhaps the eye test would say. Since week 11, Packers are number 1 in the NFL in total DVOA. They're second in offense, second in defense. This defense keeps getting better. It keeps getting healthier. I'm crossing my fingers. I'm hoping that Jair Alexander is back for this game. He's been ruled out for Monday night against the Saints, but I think bringing him back for that Minnesota game makes a lot of sense. You got Evan Williams playing well. You got Edgerrin Cooper turning into a star for that defense. I don't necessarily think this Minnesota season is smoke and mirrors. You know, you and I have talked about, was it 2 or 3 years ago where they had that crazy year where they won every one-score game. Everybody knew they were going to lose in the playoffs. That's exactly what happened. I don't get that same sense about this Vikings team, but they played 9 one-score games and they won 8 of them, including against Green Bay earlier in the season, back in week 4. Minnesota went up 28-0 in that game and barely held on to win 31-29. And that's part of what really pushes me toward Green Bay is the way that this offense operates. They can get down in games, they can get off to rough starts, but they have this kind of wild combination of being able to bludgeon you on the ground, but also hit big plays seemingly at will. So, you know, I don't think Green Bay necessarily needs to go on the road to Minnesota and play this perfect game because they have that big play ability that can drag them back into games. Last thing I'll say, Minnesota blitzes at the highest rate in the NFL. Jordan Love has had success against the blitz. I think he can take advantage. It's probably a back and forth game. I think it's going to be a high scoring game. I think Green Bay gets its signature win. Give me the Packers plus 1.5.
I like it. I was wondering and curious as to your read on this game. I think it's going to be a battle. I think it's, I believe it got flexed earlier in the day, Monday, to a better time slot. So, yeah, this is going to be an absolute battle. I think you bring up the salient points on both sides there. But I think for as well as the Vikings are playing right now, I do think the Packers, Monday night pending, although it is the Saints, they might be playing a little bit better right now. I was feeling pretty crummy about my future in October for the Packers to be representing the NFC in the Super Bowl. I feel a lot better about it now because I got that before the season. Yep. And this game will go a long way here, but I'm excited for this one. And I think you have the right side.
All right, John, where are we going next?
Alrighty, we are going to the other Christmas game. Got to keep it festive here.
Yeah, look at this.
I love it. So it's Houston plus 5.5 against Baltimore. You mentioned that they were recording this earlier. We could go even crazier. We could record the Week 18 one as the 1 o'clock games are kicking off this coming Sunday. Just go nuts with the lines because when I was doing my research this morning, it was Houston plus 4.5 at some places. But again, now it's up to 5.5. And, we only have a couple days here before this game kicks off. Hard to imagine exactly why the line moved the way it did in the direction of Baltimore. My personal theory is that it's because Houston went ahead and claimed Deontay Johnson, and somehow that just makes them a point worse. It certainly made the Ravens a point worse in his brief stay. Who could forget? But I did notice shortly before we recorded tonight, Nick, that there's a little bit of Cold War kind of tactics on both sides because the Ravens, they said, I see your Deontay Johnson claim and I raise you a Steven Sims claim. Because if you think about it, Steven Sims was in Houston longer than Deontay Johnson was in Baltimore. If you're doing the playbook game, Steven Sims has got it upstairs, Kansas Jayhawk. So lo and behold, that's my explanation for the movement, and that is absolutely why it moved. Don't question it. But beyond that, I do like Houston here with the points. I think the fact that it continues to move that way, I'll take it. I just think that this is going to be a bit of a sloppy game. I think both games on Christmas are going to be sloppy. You're asking all 4 of those teams to play 3 games in an 11-day period. I'm just taking points. Basically, I'm taking home points in particular. Obviously, the Ravens played well Saturday against the Steelers, and the Texans, they just were dealt another tough one with Tank Dell going down for the year. But for as bad as Houston has been at giving up passing touchdowns, they've actually been pretty clamped down on a per pass basis. 6.5 YPA allowed, second best in the league. It's a ragtag bunch that they're going to be rolling out there. With Diggs obviously being gone for the year for a while now. It's Nico or nobody. But I think that we're going to see a defensive battle here. I could see both offenses being a little bit clunky. The run games are going to be key on both sides, but I'm expecting a lot of field goals, and I'm expecting this one to be close just by virtue of this one not being the most beautiful game of football ever played. So I'm taking the points with Houston at 5.5.
I like your read on the schedule here. 3 games in 11 days is brutal. I think that will lend itself to sloppiness. I think that could lend itself to a low-scoring game, and ultimately 2 teams that want to keep the ball on the ground. Totals up at 46.5 for this one, which is interesting. My big pushback on Houston is, obviously you Tank Dell out of the equation, who was having his best game of the year prior to that injury against Kansas City. But that also says a lot about just how ineffective he had been for the most part this year, where it's like on paper, it's a big loss, going from Tank Dell to some of the name value that you have with the guys below him. But is it that big of a loss? It's not like Tank Dell was giving you, 8 for 95 every single week. So it just kind of adds more on the plate of CJ Stroud, which does worry me. I think this Baltimore secondary, I feel a lot better about it now than I did early in the season. But the big hesitation for me is the Houston running game. Like which version of the Texans and which version of Joe Mixon and that offensive line is going to show up? They lost another starter on the O-line this past week. In addition to Tank Dell, they finished under 100 rushing yards as a team in 5 of their last 7 games. It's just kind of been feast or famine. Either Joe Mixon goes off or he does absolutely nothing. So if Baltimore's able to limit that Houston running game and force CJ Stroud to throw the ball 30 to 35 times, like last season, that seems like it would have been a recipe for success. I don't know if I trust this year's version of CJ Stroud in that scenario.
Yeah, point well made. And it feels like when Mixon gets shut down, it is a really tough day for Houston, and that's been happening more often than not. And for all of Baltimore's defensive woes this season, none of them have really been against the run. It's been the pass defense that's been giving them issues. But yeah, Houston's kind of out of ammo there. So we're going to need Baltimore's offense to be a little bit sloppy here for this one to really come through, because it's not going to be offensive fireworks for Houston. But yeah, I just think the cumulative effect of all this football in such a condensed time frame going to be enough to keep this one within the number.
All right, there we go. Texans plus 5.5. I'm taking us over to Cleveland, Ohio for my second game, John. We are taking the Miami Dolphins minus 6.5 at Cleveland. And as you may recall, I was on the Niners last week. That was not the right decision. That is a dead team right now. I still don't even feel that great about Miami, but this is just a massive outright fade of Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who I believe will be the starter for the Browns. Again, we are recording this on Monday, so if you're watching this later in the week and he is not, this is the information that we have to work with now. Kevin Stefanski, did confirm that DTR will be the starter if he's healthy. He picked up an injury last week against Cincy. It could be Jameis, I suppose. He was dealing with an injury this past week. If not, then we're on to Bailey Zappi, which I feel okay about as my secondary option. But either way, the Browns offense, if you didn't watch that game against Cincy, I can assure you it was as much of a disaster as you probably thought it would be with DTR taking over. They ripped off a 66-yard run on the first play from scrimmage for Jerome Ford. They're down inside the 5. They end up fumbling on the goal line. They had another play where it looked like they scored later in the game. They end up throwing an interception after a bunch of holding calls in the end zone. It's what you sign up for when you start Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I know it's an evaluation period. I get it, but I don't know that he has a future as an NFL quarterback. We saw Jerry Jeudy predictably just become a total non-factor in this offense. He was averaging close to 115 yards per game with Jameis Winston, caught only 3 balls for negligent yardage last week. David Njoku also got hurt. He's been a huge part of this offense, and somebody who I think actually kind of sustains value with a quarterback like DTR, and that's a big weapon to be missing. He's getting an MRI on his knee. I don't expect him to be out there. The biggest thing, though, that kind of caught my attention with Miami last week, they were actually running the ball on San Francisco. For the first time in many, many weeks, we saw an efficient running game for the Miami Dolphins. We'll see if that sticks, but I think against this just dead as can be Cleveland Browns team, it will. I also don't expect Cleveland to do anything. Miami's defense continues to play really well. They're great against the run. They have a lot of good pass defenders as well. I lean under 40.5. I think this is one of those games that could be like 30-7 Miami Dolphins.
I like that call. Yeah, the Browns are just they're limping to the finish line here, and the Dolphins, for whatever it's worth, for them to do what they did Sunday against the 49ers shows me that they're at least playing out this season. They're not completely packing it up. Yeah, the development as far as the run game goes, I mean, the Devin Achane game saved my fantasy season in a lot of respects. So would love to see that continue. But yeah, Cleveland is just it's it for them. They've just been dealt too tough a hand for this season, and I think with that quarterback situation being what it is right now, where you can't even unlock those weapons like Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku being dinged up at this stage. Yeah, I think the Dolphins here. And again, since we're recording this on Monday, would not surprise me if we see that line go even further in Miami's direction.
Yeah, we're just asking Miami to get to 23 points, maybe even fewer, because I don't think Cleveland's putting up points. I think the only way this goes awry is if Miami just no-shows offensively, which is possible. And we could be looking at some sketchy weather conditions in Cleveland. Some rain, some wind in the forecast. But it's not like Miami is hitting all these big plays downfield. I don't really know that would impact them in the same way that you think about the Dolphins in years past. So Dolphins -6.5. That is my second play. I know you got a couple other games that you like, John. So where are we going for your third and final play for Week 17?
All right, so I do have two more, and I'll rack them up fast. One of them, listener, I apologize if things are different by the time that you're listening to this, but as of this recording, the Raiders are catching 2.5 points at the Saints. Obviously, the Saints haven't played the Packers just yet, but AOC, not terrible. Not the worst. So I think that that certainly grades higher than whatever New Orleans has at quarterback at this stage. It is in New Orleans, but I do like the Raiders with that QB advantage, as crazy as that may sound when I'm backing AOC. I swear it's not just the mustache thing. And New Orleans just too banged up generally. I mean, they kind of feel like the NFC version of Cleveland. So give me the Raiders catching 2.5. Wish the number was 3. We'll see where that goes, but as it stands, I do like that. And then I like the Bucs laying the wood. They are 7.5, some places 8-point favorites. I think a lot of people will point to the Sunday night game where they blew it against Dallas. You get beat by Dallas, that doesn't look great, right? And they were taken to overtime by the Panthers earlier on this season. This time it will be in Tampa Bay, the big sombrero, I believe, as Chris Berman used to call it. And yeah, I think that, people, the vibes generally are positive towards Carolina in a way right now that might be a little bit overwrought. I mean, Tampa Bay fighting for its playoff life right now after losing that game and the Falcons finding a way to win against the Giants. So this is a huge game for the Bucs. I think they're going to be mad too. I think, the way that Sunday night games went down, I think this might be like a bit of a beatdown in favor of the Bucs. So I do like the Bucs as well. So I'm very pirate coded with my last two picks.
So I'm seeing that line at 7.5 or 8, and this is one that jumped out to me right away as this seems a little high, right? Tampa Bay coming off a loss, Carolina coming off a big win. They played well for the most part over the last 5 or 6 weeks. We've been in this situation before, right? Where a line just feels like we're being baited in one direction or the other. And, if my first instinct right away is like, it's got to be Carolina. It's got to be Carolina. They're playing really well. They took them to overtime. Like you said, I like your call here to zag on what I think will be the public perception.
That's the 90% of how I'm feeling. I think that, yeah, my initial reaction was, oh, Carolina's playing well. Like, more than a touchdown. Are you kidding me? But no, I think the Bucs are a good team. They're not a great team. They're a fringe playoff team, but I think that they are at their best more than touchdown better than Carolina, especially at home, especially with what's at stake.
Mm-hmm. I think what we forget in all of this hoopla around the Carolina Panthers is that run defense is horrific still. And I think Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, to a lesser degree, are going to be running all over them. All right, my third and final game, John. This was tough. I like a lot of games this week, which I don't know if that's a good or a bad sign, but I picked this one over Washington. I picked it over taking that Miami-Cleveland under. I picked it over taking the over in the Denver-Cincinnati game. We are going with the L.A. Rams. And I'm searching for an updated line to make sure I got this right. 5.5. 5.5 is our number. Got to cover that at home against the Cardinals. Got to fade the Cardinals here. We got to fade the Cardinals. Season is over. Lost in incredibly depressing fashion last week. Kyler Murray is promising us that Trey McBride will get in the end zone. Not only did that not happen, Trey McBride had his worst game of the entire year. Sean McVay has, of course, owned the Arizona Cardinals throughout his career, 13-3 straight up. Did get crushed in that first matchup early in the season, but no Puka Nacua in that game. Cooper Kupp also got hurt mid-game. That's the injury that caused him to miss the next several weeks. we're looking at an Arizona team that could be down to their fourth running back. I don't expect James Conner to play in this game. They have two other running backs who were banged up and unavailable last week. And this run defense for Arizona has completely collapsed. Chuba Hubbard was running all over them last week. I think this should be a huge spot for Kyren Williams. Arizona 28th on the season in rush defense EPA. They're down to 25th in pass defense EPA. On the Rams side of things, I think you could look at the last 2 weeks and see those as two offensive letdowns. The San Francisco game was just mucky conditions. I kind of throw that one out, but didn't play a great game last week against the Jets. They only had 6 real possessions in that game. It wasn't necessarily like they just couldn't get anything going on offense. They just didn't have the ball all that much. I think that comes back around this week with playoff positioning on the line. They have a chance to basically seal up their spot. They win. They get the NFC West. I trust Sean McVay. I trust Matthew Stafford here. I think there are too many advantages for the LA Rams. And, if you're the Cardinals, like, what are you looking for motivation? It's like, play spoiler against your division rival. I guess. I feel like everything came down to last week for Arizona, and that performance was just so disheartening. I don't see them, picking themselves up off the mat and going and competing in this game on the road.
No, the Cardinals do feel dead. Like you do kind of run into these spots this time of season where you got teams eliminated from the playoffs, nothing really to play for but pride. And especially when the other team has something at stake, like, they're not going to let down. Mm-hmm. I think the Rams are just straight up the much better team. And yeah, 5.5 feels friendly. I almost feel about the Rams how you felt about the Carolina against the Buccaneers, where it's like, how would I even consider going the other direction here? But no, we like it. I like the Rams here too.
All right, there we go. Before we hand out some rapid fire props to target for the Christmas and the Thursday night slate, I need your biggest stay away of the week, John. What game do you have zero interest in betting?
So there are grosser games than this one, but they are easier to find an angle on. Cowboys-Eagles, to me, is going to be one that I'm going to have to marinate on. I'm going to have to get in my David Blaine giant orb and just kind of float around for a while until I can figure out which side to go here, because a ton of points. It's 10.5, I believe, in favor of Philly. But the Cowboys feel like they're a little bit of a live wire right now. Maybe you could argue also that the Eagles kind of had their wake-up call on Sunday against Washington, and the Cowboys, on the other side of that, kind of had their, flag plant, like, hey, we're really, salvaging this season. We're making it respectable at the very least. And, going into Philly, it's going to be tougher. But so all of that to say, I just can't bet against the Cowboys when they're getting that many points, but it's hard to fade the Eagles when we know what's in front of them as well. So that one I'm going to recuse myself for now.
Okay, I respect that. I think the low-hanging fruit this week is Tennessee, Jacksonville, and Vegas, New Orleans. At least for me, Vegas, New Orleans. Clearly, the Raiders don't care about draft positioning. It feels like something that should be factored into the calculus, but it is not. And I think the other one is Denver, Cincy for me. We got Cincy. You can find him at 3. You can find him at 3.5 as well. That's one where I think the hook really matters to me. Like at 3.5, maybe I lean Denver. At 3, it's maybe more of a pass. I think we get a high scoring game. I already mentioned I like the over in that one, but I could see anything transpiring, right? Like you could totally see that being the game where Cincinnati, once again announces like, hey, we're not dead quite yet. I could also see just like a sullen Joe Burrow, walking off the field, just sitting on the bench, kind of distraught because how did they allow the Denver Broncos to score 45 on them? I think both of these teams are liabilities defensively. Like obviously Denver is rated much better throughout the season. They are a much better defense, but they've had some slip ups over the last few weeks. I mean, gave up 34 to the Chargers less than a week ago. They gave up 30 plus to the Browns in a game that looked like they were going to lose for a while. So I don't really fully trust either side. I think Cincinnati's had some easy matchups the last couple of weeks. That defense has been able to generate turnovers against terrible quarterbacks. I don't know if that happens this week. So I think there's going to be a lot of momentum on the Cincy side. Everybody's going to side with that offense, but I just can't get a grip on that game.
No, it could go so many different ways. And again, I have the shot collar for the Bengals. So like, I can't say go Bengals, so just how it is, I'm a man of my word, but I'm very much looking forward to that game. I feel like I don't need any gambling interest to be interested in that one. I think it stands on, it is valid on its own.